Hi, I'm Paul Stringfellow and welcome to another edition of Tech Interviews. So on this week's show, we're taking a look at a question that always interests me, and that's the idea of that we have lots of technology vendors in our industry who are coming up with solutions and developing solutions all the time. And then we have lots of enterprises who have business problems and IT problems to solve. So how do we know that the vendors and the enterprises are talking to each other and that they're developing solutions that are appropriate to meet the problems of the enterprise? So what's a good way of doing that? Well, one way of doing that is maybe trying to put those two groups together in kind of a user group, an influence community. So recently I came across a group that I'd not come across before, whose aim in life is to do that exactly for the large and medium enterprise, to make sure that they get access to vendors and can help to shape that vendors are doing exactly the right thing and meeting the real challenges that enterprise come across. So I thought that'd make a great subject for this week's podcast, and an opportunity to learn a little bit more about that myself, and hopefully for the viewers and listeners, something for you to pick up on as well. So to help me to join that, to discuss that, I'm joined this week by Nick Lippis. Nick, how are you doing? How's things?
I'm excellent, Paul. Thank you. Hi, nice to be here, and hi everyone in the Tech Stringy community.
Yeah, see, I never thought of having a community, but yeah, so if there is one, please let me know and give me a wave. That'd be lovely. Well, Nick, look, before we jump into the subject, thanks for being on Tech Interviews. It's always good to have somebody who does something that I know nothing about, because as we say, every day is a school day. But before we jump into kind of what your organisation does, why don't you give us a little bit about who you are, what your background is?
Okay, sure. Well, an engineer by kind of training, and I am one of the co-founders and co-chairs of ONUG. And ONUG is a community, as you mentioned, of large enterprises, kind of the medium to large enterprise community. And Paul, you're right. You know, it's like what the community is really focused on doing is providing use cases and interacting with the vendor community to make sure that the vendor community is addressing some of the big challenges that they have. And everybody is really confronted with huge challenges today. So that's my background. Also, for about 25 years, I was an independent industry analyst in the marketplace. And so I've been around for a while.
Well, that I didn't like to say. Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting area that that ONUG works in, and and it's an interesting aim that you've got. So what was the background behind setting this kind of user group up, this community up? Where were you seeing some of the shortfalls, and kind of what are you guys hoping to achieve, and perhaps a little bit, because you've been around a little while as well. This is not something that's brand new. You've been around a little while, so so kind of what was the context of that? What had you seen? What are you trying to solve?
Okay, yeah. So ONUG was started in about 2012 timeframe. It was myself and Ernest Leffner. Ernest at the time was at Fidelity, and we had talked actually at another conference. And the issue of where do IT executives go to talk with others, to learn best practices, challenges, so they can avoid major pitfalls or going down cul-de-sacs of technologies that are a waste. So that was really the impetus. And one of the big backdrops to that was that during the 2008 timeframe, when we all were suffering from kind of the Great Recession, was there had to be some massive changes that a lot especially in the financial services, had to make. And so when they were talking to their vendor community about making these changes, the vendor community would come back to them with a normal response saying, okay, sure, we can do that. It's going to be about $30-40 million to do it. And so they got tired of that response. And so they realized is that the only way to change an industry and to bend a curve is that they can't do it alone, even with the largest of corporations, like you're Bank of America or you're Barclays, or Boots or, BP, what have you. You have a certain amount of influence on the vendor community, but really only around price. So you can get what they're offering at a lower price because of your size and your scale. but you can't really influence them in terms of changing the way that they're approaching the market. And that was really the impetus for ONU. Is can we band together as a community, aggregate our requirements, communicate them, and then start buying based upon those. And so, in that regard, you can start to actually bend the curve. And so, at ONU, we've used this to introduce new markets. Like, for example, the software defined networking marketplace really started at ONU. We invented the software defined wide area space. And back in 2014, we started talking about hybrid cloud as a main mean for the large enterprise to start engaging in cloud consumption. And then shortly after that, it was really around multi-cloud. So anyway, sorry, I don't mean to have this really long explanation about what we do. That was too long. So anyway, hopefully that was enough background.
That's fair. That's a great explanation, I think, and I think it's hugely important. It's often an area that that we can forget in that people who head up enterprises who are involved in developing IT strategy, who are seen as the head of IT within an organization. For a lot of those users, I think sometimes they have this real problem of who do I speak to? The people that work for them expect them to know all the answers. The people that employ them expect that they know all the answers. Who do they go and speak to? And I think building these kind of communities is hugely important and hugely valuable.
Yeah, no, no, well, thanks. I think, for example, we look at some of our board members and, okay, well, one of the first questions is why do you want to become a board member at ONUG? And I think we always get this one response, among other things, but the key response is to amplify my voice. And so, like, they can communicate and they can advocate for certain feature sets or what have you from the vendor community, but that only goes so far. And there's a lot of lip service that gets served to them. But if all of a sudden, like 5 or 10 companies were saying the same thing, then that's a little different. And so they're able to amplify their requirements, and that's a key component of ONU. And this is not about us versus them, like buyers versus sellers. It really is a community to interact, collaborate, to chart a new course. Is there friction? Absolutely. There's always friction because the vendor community has products that they want to sell today. And as a user community, you're talking about what you need, not with what's being offered today. So there's always that little out of phase discussion that happens within ONU. But the bottom line is that when you have new companies coming in, like a whole bunch of startup companies that are now developing new products, they tend to do really, really well within ONUG. And we're really proud of some of the companies that really they launched at ONUG and they've had really great outcomes. Companies like Viptela and VeloCloud and Avi Networks and Veriflow and Thousand Eyes, big parts of this community and had really great outcomes. And we're happy about that. We want that to happen. They started here and they got acquired by whether that was Cisco, VMware, Google, or what have you. And that's goodness from the ONUG's community point of view because, all right, now that those large corporations can address their requirements better. And so it's a win-win for everyone. But sometimes the journey is a little painful for some.
So, Nick, I think that's really interesting. And something you said earlier on that really caught my attention was that idea of enterprises will be going to vendors with problems and vendors would turn around and say, well, that's $40 million and we can sort that out, so of course they would like that idea. But I'm interested when you approached them about the user community in ONUG and what you were looking to set up, what was the vendors' reaction? How keen were they to get involved? How keen were they to talk? And, and you just shared kind of in your last answer some of the successes you've seen, but has that been a long process to get that kind of vendor buy-in, or were they all really keen to be talking to enterprises?
No, it was a really easy lift to bring the vendor community in. The first one at Fidelity, we only invited 10 startup companies. And what was key about the startup companies is that they struggle to navigate and to have access to the kinds of companies that are represented at ONU. So that was really easy for them. And that started. But then once we did that, a lot of the larger vendors felt like they were being left out. It's like, well, why aren't we invited to be part of this community? And they were right. So the next one was held at JP Morgan. At JP Morgan, we invited the larger vendor community, and they've been there ever since. And I think so. They've at first it takes a little bit of time because salespeople are motivated to sell products today and get their commissions today, like within the quarter, where ONUG is more of a longer, term, longer view of the marketplace. So sometimes it takes a little bit of adjustment, for that. But the key thing that they find is that now they're engaged in these dialogues that are not transactional, that they're more about a journey, and rather than, okay, something I need to buy tomorrow. If a large user needs to buy something tomorrow, they're going to buy it. They need to. They need to support their business. But what's really key is to making sure that that isn't just a one-time deal, and that there is actually, value that continues onward. And I think they get that from ONU.
Yeah, no, I mean, firstly, I think it's it's great to hear that vendors are keen to do that. I think it's very easy for us to sit there and think that vendors aren't listening. So I think there's it's great to hear that vendors indeed are listening and are keen to listen. And you talked before about some of the success stories you've had. So what have been your kind of your big value successes that you've seen so far? What has there been anything that enterprise has brought to the table that vendors just were not thinking about and was a surprise to everybody involved?
Yeah, actually, you can look at this in two different ways. One, you can look at it in terms of the things that we talk about at the conference. So, like the next meeting is October 14th and 15th. It's an online conference. There'll be between 3,000 and 5,000 community members attending that one. And over the course of the years, the things that we tend to talk about are the things that get implemented, they get built. So, for example, like I mentioned, the SD-WAN marketplace back in 2012, it didn't exist, but it occurred at ONUG. It was a use case that came up at ONUG, and then all of the vendor community started to focus on that activity, and we were able to help foster, gave permission to, provided input around requirements and use cases for that marketplace to develop. And now it's what, a $5 or $6 billion marketplace. So the SD-WAN marketplace is really key. The other key, I think, big contribution that ONUG has made is around hybrid cloud. So we started talking about hybrid cloud, I think it was at Columbia University around 2014. And so that kicked off a whole discussion with the cloud providers. And then shortly after that, that's when we start to see Microsoft Arc come into the marketplace, Atheos from Google, not Portal, what's the product name from Amazon? Outpost from Amazon, IBM Private Cloud. So we started that marketplace as well. There are key things that we didn't talk about because we didn't really view them as being really important. And so that's also important as well. So for example, like back in this 2012, 2013 timeframe, there was a lot of discussion about white boxes for networking. We looked at that. And there was also this hype around this protocol called OpenFlow. So we looked at that. We said, not interesting. We're not going to do it. And so we didn't give it permission to enter the marketplace, and it never did. The other thing was OpenStack. We looked at OpenStack, and we were like, okay, well, do we want to start having use cases and having discussions about that? And kind of the board was like, well, we don't really have use cases for it. If we do, it's going to be these small little corner cases. So we never did, never took hold, in the large enterprise marketplace. So there are lots of different examples of things that the vendor community really hypes, and we kind of ignore it because we don't see the value in it. And if that's as big of an indicator as anything. And I didn't realize that at the kind of beginning of the journey of ONUG, but now it's like, hey, if it's not, we're not talking about it, if it's not into the program, then it's not important, and it's going to have a hard time to be successful. So I think those are a couple of examples.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, they're really important examples because actually that idea of what you don't talk about as opposed to just what you do, it's easy to look at the big successes, but I think that's a constant balance that the industry has. The industry that we're a part of, and in my day job, I kind of work for a consultancy firm, so we do data management consultancy, so it's very easy to get lost between the vendor hype, if you like, at one end, and it's not always hype. That sounds like a not even a backhanded compliment, does it? It's not a compliment in any way. And the real challenge is that the customers are seeing at the other end, and sometimes you feel there's a disconnect. It's great to see sometimes as well that there's organisations there with enough influence to kind of push back on some of the some of the things that vendors are looking at. An OpenStack's a really interesting case of that. There's lots and lots of vendor talk around that. There's lots of vendors involving themselves in the OpenStack community, contributing to it, coming up with OpenStack solutions. But I guess it's as valuable for them as it is for the enterprise community. For a group of influential companies to turn around and say it's just not of interest to us, and perhaps this is why. I'm guessing it's not just people saying no, we just don't want to hear about that. There's proper feedback going back and saying actually we don't want to hear about it, and here's our reasons why we don't want. I take it that's kind of the normal form of that takes.
Yeah, and and some we had some sponsors that were heavily invested in OpenStack, and we let them know the kind of the view, and they were upset, and they didn't. They decided to disengage with the community, and it is what it is. We started using the term, like you got OpenStacked, because it's like the vendor community poured a huge amount of money into that project. The hype level was off the chart as well. If you all, kind of everyone in the audience kind of remembers that in kind of the 2015, I guess, like time frame, and then it just precipitously, boom, dropped. And so, and like I said, I think that's a really, and not to kind of pick on OpenStack, but I think it talks volumes of why ONUG is here and what the value of ONUG offers to the community. It avoids cul-de-sacs, making investments in technologies that just not going to work, even though it has a wrapper of open or an open source project. It doesn't matter if it doesn't deliver value, and there aren't good use cases. It's just not going to go anywhere, and we're really good at calling that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. No, nobody wants to be told the baby's ugly, do they? So that's always the case. So I mean, that's been an interesting kind of look at what you've done so far and kind of a little bit about why you exist and where you came from. Before we started recording, we talked about some of the issues that you're seeing today, the things that enterprises are bringing to ONUG to say these are the kind of areas we're interested in to find out what the technology industry is doing to help with this. And I suppose that big ticket thing right now is around kind of this digital transformation. So what is the kind of stuff that we're seeing coming to ONUG now? What would we expect here at the conference coming in October? What are the key issues that you're seeing that enterprises, both large and mid-size, are really coming across now?
Yeah, I think the key thing that happened, in the spring time frame when we had our meeting in the spring, everyone was reacting to COVID, right, and building out remote workforces and making sure that everyone was connected, and then scrambling. I think that's probably an accurate term. Scrambling to get to service their customers, their partners, and suppliers digitally. Right. What happened with COVID is that now you also had to service your employees digitally. And so that got ramped up, in haste, and a lot of folks made bad decisions. And so we're going to talk about that coming up in the fall timeframe. But I think the big thing, the big picture that happened with COVID was that now business and digital strategy are one. It used to be that, okay, this is our business strategy, and this is how our digital strategy is going to support that. That is so old-fashioned thinking. Now it's really, they are so tightly interwoven and integrated into each other. And if you haven't really, from an executive level and from a board level, have kind of come to that realization, then you're going to be left behind, because companies, there's a massive breakaway that's going on right now. You see that with Walmart and Target as a good example. The biggest example you see is Tesla with the automotive industry as well. All of those companies that were digital or have made significant investments in being digital are now breaking away from their non-digital, peers. Or competitors. So the first day, we're going to really talk about that convergence of both digital strategy and business strategy, how they've come together, and then what you need in terms of leadership and strategy and direction and culture within an organization, skill sets, reorganization. So we'll talk a lot about that during the first day. The second day is how do you build? Kind of both. We are now focused on the enterprise cloud, but we think that's really just a first step, in really being a digital enterprise. So you need kind of to embrace cloud technologies, both public cloud as well as private cloud technologies. And then you start to layer on AI and machine learning around business processes, not just around IT. And how do you better add value for all the interactions that you have with customers, partners, suppliers, and clearly now employees? How do you get automation and efficiency into large organizations? So the second day is really going to be around building. And I think one area, sort of kind of drill down on that part for a second, the industry, the infrastructure industry, so compute, storage, and networking, part of our industry, which is a massively large group. That where we've kind of made this transition, and this is something that ONUG has been advocating as well. We went from buying boxes, so switches, routers, load balancing, firewalls, all of these boxes, and we put them into data centers or into branch offices. We went from that to virtualized boxes, right? So soft switches as a good example, like firewalls as modules and code, and load balancers as code. So we've kind of made that transition. The transition that we're now about to make is that infrastructure becomes a set of library tools that developers can call upon. And when we're just starting that transition, and that transition has a real fundamental impact on both how IT delivers digital value for their businesses and how the vendor community serves those businesses as well. And so we'll be spending a good amount of time about that during the 2 days also. So there's a whole bunch of sessions all around those two major topics. Great number of speakers, probably the best lineup of speakers we've ever had at an ONUG as well. The largest community gathering that we've ever had or will ever have, not will ever have, but ever had, will be in October as well. So let me stop there and see if there's something we want to drill down on.
Yeah, so yeah, a lot to unpack. I think is fair to say there. So, I mean, firstly, that sounds like a really interesting couple of days. And we'll kind of wrap up in a few minutes around how people maybe can find out more, maybe even be a part of that session. Like say, it's online, it's available for people to access, and maybe a first chance for some people to get to an event they perhaps wouldn't be able to attend normally. But so there's a couple of things that really stood out for me. I think one of the things that you talked about kind of in that first part, and I think is hugely important as we move into this kind of stage of what people grandly call digital transformation, how it's not just a technology thing now, that importance of culture and how we change the way our businesses operate, how our people operate, and even the way that we think about technology, that idea that business and technology strategies cannot be separate. I spend a lot of time talking to organizations about the importance of data strategies, for example, today, the idea that you need to build strategies focus on the data and information, not about how do I build a storage array, put data on it, and then give that back to the business and say, do your best. That's not how modern IT and business strategy and data strategy should be working. But the thing I kind of wanted to just pick up on before we wrap up, because I appreciate we're starting to run a little short on time. But so one of the things I kind of wanted to pick up on though was that idea about the second day, that kind of developing of infrastructure and building that digital platforms for kind of modern business. Have you seen there been a shift in how people are thinking about that? Because we've talked about COVID, and we've done the elephants in the room kind of conversation, and and no doubt that has changed how businesses are thinking of the way their digital platforms are developing. But are you seeing that there's a big change in the way that people are looking to architect solutions, or are you just seeing things that were going to happen anyway just being accelerated?
Accelerated, yeah, because we've been talking about this for a number of years, and I think there's the first real phase around digital transformation is to kind of adopt cloud technologies, DevOps best practices. DevOps in the large enterprise is a totally different beast than DevOps that we would normally think about, first of all. So DevOps is being deployed very, very differently in large organizations because normally you have a dev group and you have an ops group, and they don't mix too well within large enterprise. A lot of process, there. But anyway, to get to your point, Paul, is that we've seen an acceleration. It's probably about almost like a 10 to 1, meaning that what would normally take 10 years is now being done like within 1 year. The thinking, anyway, has been totally accelerated. The deployment is lagging because of just skill sets, culture, organization, being able to kind of consume and build solutions. So I think the biggest thing in the near term is that in the first part of the year, it was all about remote workforce and getting everybody up and running on remote workforces. In the second part of the year, the transition that occurred is many had viewed kind of public cloud as an efficiency play, meaning that, okay, I might be able to get more agility if I go to the cloud. I might be able to save some money if I go to the cloud, but that was definitely a fool's errand on the saving of the money, but in essence, it was really thought about, okay, efficiency. That's totally changed. It's really now that is the business platform, now. And so how do you kind of accelerate moving applications into the cloud, whether that's lifting and shifting or, rip and replace or rewriting, what have you. So there's a lot of that kind of thinking being accelerated right now within large enterprise. The biggest consequence, I think, to that is that data centers are being hollowed out. So one topic that we'll have at ONUG is that actually, what do you leave in a data center, today? So Intuit is a really good example. They recently shut down all of their data centers, and that the only thing they have left might be like 1 or 2 routers. That's really it. All of that hardware is gone. So there's a whole new thinking about, okay, we have now the thinking that employees are going to be staying either remote or they're going to be highly distributed in these distributed kind of pockets. We see that across a lot of the community, like in the pharmaceutical companies, a lot of them are selling their campuses. All right, and so like they have no intention of bringing people back, but they're going to be renting out WeWorks facilities in particular locations. So you have now the aggregation of people going into WeWork spaces or staying at home. And so if you look at that, then that talks to a whole new kind of architecture, and we're calling that elastic infrastructure. And so that talks towards 5G, towards edge computing within those facilities, zero trust for access, the confluence of security and networking is occurring there. The utility or the value of the colos, there we go, colos, like Equinix and others, is becoming now in question. Do you really need them? So there's a real hollowing out, of both the large, both in terms of data centers and also in the traditional ways that you would connect into the cloud as well. So that's part of the construction, is to make the infrastructure really elastic, being able to access the tools that the cloud providers are doing, get your whatever you're doing in your data center, suck out all of that kind of business logic that was encoded in firewalls and load balances and routers and all that infrastructure stuff, and put that into overlays so that your applications can more freely move as well. So Anyway, I don't want to kind of, hopefully I'm not droning on, but those are some of the key things that we're going to be talking about during the 2 days.
And I think everything you've described there sounds like the last 6 months of conversations I've been having inside of enterprises. All of those things that we're talking about. How do we re-architect for the future, whatever the future is going to look like? How do we learn from what we've been doing? I think that if nothing else, we should have learnt a lot, and it would be a pity not to take advantage of that stuff. And I think, as you say, lots of companies aren't looking to necessarily roll back, but some of them might be looking at some rolling back, but taking the good stuff and kind of driving that forward. And those conversations around, what do we do with data centers as we leave them? What do we do with the stuff that we're leaving in them? How do we make sure that that's maintained, continues to operate, continues to deliver what we need it to? And how all of those kind of conversations, I think, are really valuable. And if ever, if people have not come across ONUG before, and I know I hadn't till we've had this conversation, the timing doesn't sound like it could be any better to kind of come across the organisation now. So, well, look, as we look to wrap up, it's probably a great time to do that. So how do people find out more about kind of ONUG, maybe how they perhaps get involved in that community, and of course, the event you've been talking about, how do they find out about that? How do they join up to that?
Yeah, just go to fall.onug.net. So fall.onug.net. And you can register for free for the 2 days. It's one thing that we've done, moving everything to a virtual event, is that we opened up the community to the largest number of people possible by dropping the barrier of entry to become part of the community. So we invite you all to come on in. Come in for one session, 2 sessions, the 2 days, whatever works for you, wherever you find value in the program, just consume that. And I think that's the first thing, kind of experience one. And then once you experience one, you want to get involved into the working groups, you can just easily sign up to the working groups and start to get involved and get engaged there. One big initiative that I didn't mention, if you don't mind, if I can take a couple of seconds, is that we started a collaborative. It's called the ONUG Collaborative, and that was founded by myself and the CISOs of FedEx, Cigna, and Raytheon. And that collaborative is now focused on one of the biggest obstacles to cloud consumption in the large enterprise, and that's governance. How do you control that? How do you control information and data? How do you control the cost of a cloud sprawl that is going on across many organizations? So that's a really important project for us. We kicked off a working group in December called the Automated Cloud Governance Working Group. So how do you automate this governance? What kind of data do we need from the cloud providers? So we published a report on that, and now we just kicked off the second phase, and we invited all the cloud providers to engage. And so now we have Goldman Sachs has joined, Pfizer, JP Morgan Chase, I'm sure I'm missing Casa Permanente. I'm sure there's a few others as well. So that's a really important project that we're doing for the community, and it will spill over into the industry at large. So we hope to make some real good contributions there as well.
Yeah, and again, it's an issue whose time has come for far more organisations far more quickly than they might have otherwise expected. They may have had cloud projects that were 18, 24 months away. Suddenly they're now 3 months away, or they're live. So governing that, managing cost, managing information security, managing sprawl, all of those things are huge issues. And I think because of the scale of cloud, things like automating those solutions, finding good frameworks to build those solutions in are going to be hugely important. I think just as we wrap up, maybe as a comment from me, I'm a huge advocate of the importance of kind of community. I think I talk to a lot of people who are in senior IT roles, and one of their biggest challenges is, who do I speak to? We said this kind of early on in the show, that they're the people who work for them expect them to know everything. The people who employ them expect them to know everything. That ability to build kind of relationships with your peer group is hugely important. But I think adding the vendors into the mix and giving the vendors and the enterprises the opportunity to discuss information together and share ideas together, again, I feel must have huge value. So, and so I would absolutely, I know I'm going to be checking out the ONUG sessions in October. If I can do more than one or two, I certainly will be. So I'm looking forward to doing that. But Nick, before we wrap up, if people want to kind of follow up with you, find out a little bit more about kind of what you do to day, can they do that? Social media, LinkedIn, email, etc.
Yeah, I'm kind of all over the place there, you know. Clearly I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter. Just search, in Google. I'm sure you'll be able to find me.
Yeah.
Pretty easily.
Sure, we'll be able to hunt you down. And if not, head over to the ONUG community site, and
ONUG.net.
yeah, people will
Yeah,
definitely be finding you there. Well, Nick, look, hey, thanks for being on Tech Interviews. Really enjoyed it. I think it's really interesting work that the organisation's doing, that user group's doing, and long may its success continue. So thanks for being on Tech Interviews, and hopefully have you on again sometime in the future.
awesome, great, Paul. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for listening and for being a part of the podcast.
I hope you enjoyed that. For show notes, pop over to techstringy.com. We'll also find all of our previous Tech Interviews episodes. And if you've got an idea for a show or would like to appear as a guest, then why not drop me an email? You can find me at podcast@techstringy.com. And if you want to make sure you catch all future episodes of Tech Interviews, then why not subscribe? You can subscribe on the YouTube channel. Of course, you can subscribe in all good homes of podcasts. So until next time, thanks for watching.